All right, today we're going to continue with our run through our authoritarian states study on Nazi Germany with the opposition that Hitler dealt with in Germany. Now, that opposition is going to first be targeted in the Night of the Long Knives, June of 1934, when Adolf Hitler will move against the opposition to him within his own political party. Called the Night of the Long Knives, this is the purge of Nazi party members that opposed or challenged Hitler's leadership. Starting at the top with Ernst Röhm, the leader of the SA, who would be arrested and ultimately executed. The SA would then be replaced largely by the SS as that grew into Adolf Hitler's secret police force and military apparatus. In the Night of the Long Knives, over 1,000 party members were arrested, hundreds were killed. Now, following that, there really was limited opposition to Nazi rule in Germany. The passing of the Enabling Act made political opposition virtually impossible in Germany, and opposition movements against Hitler in Germany really lacked any kind of organization after the rise of Adolf Hitler. The opposition that did exist centered on two periods when things ultimately weren't going that well for Germany, or at least there were times of crisis in the state. 1939, with the eve and the start of World War II, and then 1942 to 1945, when things in the war started to turn south for the Germans. Little opposition existed in Germany from the times of perceived success of Adolf Hitler's rule, from 1934 to 1938, and then from 1939 to 1942. Now, opposition from the political left was largely suppressed in the earliest days of the Nazi regime following the Reichstag fire in 1933, when thousands of Communist Party members and Socialist Party members would land in concentration camps like Dachau in southern Germany. Labor unions were banned, and there would be imprisonment and execution for any future attempts to organize labor. And so really, the left-wing opposition was kept largely underground and unorganized throughout the duration of the Nazi rule. In August of 1939, when Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, this would lead to an easing in the persecution of communists in Germany, though that resumed after June of 1941, when Germany violated that pact and invaded the Soviet Union. Now, other opposition, and some of it from the political right, coming from leadership within the military or the traditional aristocracy in Germany, would be labeled as Schwarzkapelle by the Gestapo. Now, this was not really an organized movement against Germany, though there would be some organized plans to try to topple the Hitler regime. Most of this opposition came from the military, as Hitler was the commander-in-chief of that military, and he oftentimes failed to take the recommendations of his military leaders. After the tide of the war changed into 1943 and beyond, there would be numerous failed assassination attempts of Adolf Hitler. Most famous is what becomes a part of Operation VALKYRIE, the July 20th bomb plot of 1944. This was a part of a larger coup attempt by some in the military to try to take over the government from the Nazis following the assassination of Adolf Hitler. There was a bomb placed in a meeting place that Hitler was attending by a guy named Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. The bomb was detonated. Hitler was at the table, but he escaped relatively unscathed due to this massive wooden German table where the table leg ultimately protected Adolf Hitler from greater injury. Following this failed coup, over 7,000 suspected participants were rounded up and arrested, with nearly 5,000 being executed. Another part of that limited opposition that Adolf Hitler faced during his rule was from German youth. The German youth suffered from having their social and leisure activities restricted by the Nazi Party, required membership in youth groups like the Hitler Youth. And so out of this rose some opposition movements of ultimately limited impact on the state from these young people. The White Rose Group. This was a small group of students led out of Munich University by Hans and Sophie Scholl, who created and distributed anti-Nazi propaganda in Germany, in Munich, in Germany. Ultimately exposed in 1943, 6 members of this organization were executed by guillotine, including the brother and sister team, Hans and Sophie Scholl. Other opposition from German youth came from a group called the Swingjugend, or the Swing Kids, who resisted Nazi conformity with their support of American jazz music and dance. The Edelweiss Pirates. This was a German-wide, loosely organized group of German youth who resisted the Hitler Youth, and ultimately before they were forced to join the military. They rebelled against Nazi restrictions on their leisure and in society, and during the war, some actively supported army deserters and helped to distribute Allied leaflets that were dropped onto Germany. In 1944, the SS cracked down on these organizations, and this led to a public hanging of many teenagers across Germany. There's also some religious opposition to Hitler's rule, but this likewise is relatively limited. Some individual clergy members would resist Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, but there was no formal opposition from major churches in Germany throughout the time of Hitler's rule. Nazi opposition to communism largely appealed to many churches, as they saw communism as godless, and so the Nazi Party at least allowed them to exist. Martin Niemöller established what was called the Confessional Church in 1934 that stood in opposition to Nazis' influence on the Lutheran Church. He would find himself imprisoned in a concentration camp for that activity. The church support of the regime allowed some levels of church influence on Nazi policy. For example, resistance from the Roman Catholic Church led to Hitler's abandonment of his T4 euthanasia program that had killed tens of thousands, upwards of 200,000 in Germany from 1939 to 1941 for mental defects and physical defects and such. Although some killings within this euthanasia program continued until the end of the war. Opposition in Germany ultimately failed, though, because Hitler really was overwhelmingly popular for most of the duration of his rule, especially through 1942 until the war turned on him. Strict punishments of those who did oppose German Nazi rule led few to openly oppose him. Any challenge to Hitler's authority was against German state law and could result in that imprisonment or worse. It would only be the military defeat of Nazi Germany that would bring down the party and Adolf Hitler in the spring of 1945. We'll catch you next time.